Hello everyone, how's it going? Billy Ballgame here, back with another video. On this channel, I'm just a dude who loves baseball and loves to talk about baseball cards. And today's video is going to be kind of a continuation of last week's video where I talked about kind of ways that I have built a vintage collection on a budget. And then I went into some ways on how you can kind of do the same thing, right? But I focus mostly on graded cards. And today I'm going to focus on ungraded cards. So again, as you all know, I collect on a $200 a month budget. I'm in the middle of a 1960 top set that I'm about halfway through. And my collection focus right now is very wide based. I collect everything from vintage all the way up to modern stuff, but my collection is mostly focused on vintage, probably followed by what I would consider the junk wax era, even maybe prior to and post junk wax era. But today's focus is going to be how you can pick up ungraded vintage cards on a budget and how you can find them, in my opinion, amazingly cheap. And some of you may not be aware of how cheap that some of these cards can actually be found. And I'm going to cover cards today from 1955 Bowman all the way up to the late 70s. And so a lot of you may think, how do I find 50s cards for cheap if I'm on a $50 a month budget or whatever the case may be for you? And I'll tell you, there are a lot of them out there, like I covered in last week's video. With the 50s, it's a little bit harder. You may just have to be patient, and you're also going to have to look for the right players. So ungraded, are you going to be able to find Mickey Mantle cards in the 50s for $50? There might be a couple combo cards, like I mentioned last week. The 58 or 59 combo card with Mickey Mantle and Richie Ashburn, I think, is pretty cheap. But so guys like Mickey Mantle, Willie Mays, Hank Aaron, some of those guys are a little bit tougher. But there are a whole lot of Hall of Famers out there that you can find in the 50s that are cheap, ungraded, that you can afford with really just about any budget. So the first one I'm going to show you is a 55 Bowman red Shandeens. So as you all know, I'm a Cardinals collector. Is one of the focuses in my collection. Now this card has rounded corners. And don't pay attention to the $28 price tag on there. That is off of this Bowman, or this Beckett right next to me. So this card came out of my showcase. And all the cards in my showcase, just for curiosity's sake, I priced based off of this 1993 Beckett. But this 55 Bowman, I bought at my first card show that I went to in Columbia when I moved back to Missouri, and I paid $10 for this card. Now, if I were to grade this, I would say it would probably grade in the 3 range. And I may get it graded at some point. But the big thing is, and I'm probably guilty of this as well, is I feel like since the popularity of grading has risen, especially since the pandemic and post-pandemic, that people place less emphasis on graded or on ungraded cards. And in my opinion, again, I'm guilty of this myself, because all the really cool cards, big cards that I have in my collection, I want those graded, right? But the cards are still cool, whether they're graded or ungraded. So I feel that just a lot of people don't really care about ungraded cards anymore. And there are cards that I have in my collection that I will probably never grade, but I will keep them in my collection as ungraded cards. And so a way to get into the vintage side of the hobby is buying a lot of these cards ungraded. And if you're a person who happens to not be a fan of grading cards, then that's fine. Just keep them ungraded in your collection. And like I touched on in last week's video, if you do like graded cards, then just use your following month's allowance to get some of them graded. Buy cards 1 month, grade cards 1 month. And you can find some really cool vintage cards on the cheap and then pay 15 bucks to get them graded, or in that ballpark, depending on who you grade with. So first card, 1955 Bowman Red Schaendienst. I paid 10 bucks for that card at a card show. The next card I'm going to show is one of my more recent pickups, and this guy is not a Hall of Famer, but I also talked about buying star cards. And this is a 1960 Topps Rocky Colavito. And Rocky Colavito was no doubt a star back in the 50s and 60s, and would be a Hall of Very Good level player. This card I bought for the 60 set for 15 bucks at the last card show I went to, in the hopes that I could send this into grade and it would grade in the 5 or 6 range, and then it would fit nicely with my 60 top set. But there are a lot of guys on the same level as Rocky Colavito that were all-stars and really good players, and some of them even won MVPs. They're just not in the Hall of Fame, but there are lots of guys out there like him that their cards are relatively cheap. I mentioned Ted Kluszewski and Hank Bauer. Ken Boyer would be another one. So there are a lot of those types of players. Norm Cash. And then here's another one. This one is a Hall of Famer, and this one is very, very rough. So this is a 69 Topps Roberto Clemente, and I have more ungraded vintage cards in my collection. I just didn't want to go through my entire collection, all my boxes, and pull all those cards out. But you can see this one in the 1993 Beckett is the high book price would be $50 on this card. But I would wager to say that you can find one way nicer than this. Like, this one's really off-centered. You can find one way nicer than this now for 50 bucks probably, would be my guess. And then I think I paid 15 or $10 to $20 for this card a few years ago, just because I really like it. And it thought, even with its off-centering, that it was a really cool card. So this is another example of how you can buy Hall of Famers from the 60s, especially the late 60s, for cheap. Ungraded. Bob Gibson is really cheap. Bill Mazeroski. In the early to mid 60s, some of Yogi Berra's cards are pretty cheap. Ernie Banks gets pretty cheap. And then, like I've said before, even some of the Willie Mays and Hank Aaron's in the late 60s, ungraded are not that, they're not super expensive. I would recommend that you look for well-conditioned, well-centered, sharp examples of those cards. And of course, you're going to pay a little bit more. But I think you really would be surprised at some of the prices that you can find some of these cards for. And again, that's just kind of a snapshot. Now, I'm going to get more in depth here in the next few minutes in the 70s, because for me, that's really where a budget collector in the vintage world can really focus, because a lot of these cards from the 70s, they were available more than the 50s and 60s. The print runs were higher. They're a lot cheaper. So you can really get some cool cards ungraded from the 70s that you would be happy to add to your collection. Again, I would just recommend that you buy the nicest conditioned cards that you can afford for your collection. And that way, if you do decide to get them graded, then you're not going to get a bunch of 1s and 2s and then, you know, have $20 sunk into a $10 card, which you can do that if you're going to keep that. If you're going to keep that in your collection, and that's what you want to do, by all means, do that. But again, to me, if I'm going to pay $30 for a card and have it graded and it comes back, or $15 to get a card graded, and let's say I paid $5 for it, I get it graded and it comes back and it's worth $10. Well, then I would have rather have taken that $10 and just bought the card for $10 or the $20 and bought a nicer version of that card for $20. I hope that makes sense. That's what I would rather do for my collection. So really where you can make your money, not make your money, but make your mark collecting vintage on a budget in the 70s is the leader cards. And a lot of people don't like these. And this is not a very nice example, but I'm willing to bet you can find super sharp versions of this for $10 or $20. And this card has 3 Hall of Famers on it. It's got Johnny Bench, Billy Williams, and Tony Perez. Sorry about that. I was trying to think of who it was, who Billy Williams was, looking at it backwards. So 3 Hall of Famers on this card. You could find it super cheap. And then that's the same card, or actually, so that's the RBI leaders. This is the home run leaders. But again, the same 3 Hall of Famers. And this one's in rough shape. But you could probably find this one for $2 or $3 in this condition very easily. So here's one with Frank Howard, Carl Yastrzemski, and Harmon Killebrew. Frank Howard's not a Hall of Famer, but he was a really good player. This is the American League home run leaders, but 2 Hall of Famers on this card. Here's another Carl Yastrzemski and Tony Oliva, so 2 Hall of Famers on that one. And then here's a pitching card, strikeout leaders with 3 Hall of Famers. You've got Tom Seaver, Fergie Jenkins, and Bob Gibson. 3 of the best to ever do it. And again, you could find these cards in excellent condition for probably $20 or near mint for $20. Have I already shown this one? So this is, yeah, I think I already showed that one. That's another Bench, Billy Williams, and Tony Perez. And here's another pitching leaders card with Bob Gibson, Fergie Jenkins, and Gaylord Perry. But again, 3 Hall of Famers, another card that you could get super cheap. And then I've got some 72s here. This is Joe Torre, who's in the Hall of Fame not as a player, even though he was really, really good. He's in the Hall of Fame as a manager, but it's also Willie Stargell and Hank Aaron in a leaders card. And this is another card that you could pick up probably in mint or near mint condition for $20, $30. Or you could buy it in this condition for probably $5. So here's a super cool card. This is Fergie Jenkins, Steve Carlton, Al Dowling, who's not in the Hall of Famer but was a really good pitcher, and Tom Seaver. So 3 Hall of Famers on this card. And a lot of people don't like the leaders cards or combo cards, but I really like them, and they're so cheap. Like, to me, this is a great way to get some cool Hall of Famers in vintage cards. So there's Reggie Smith, not a Hall of Famer, but a really good player. Frank Robinson and Harmon Killebrew. And then 71 home run leaders. This is Willie Stargell, Hank Aaron, and Lee May. Again, in my opinion, a really cool card. So another thing to think about is buying combo or league leader cards. Because again, you can get those cheap all day long and have some really nice cards. Even if you buy them ungraded that are in good enough condition to get high grades, then you've got super cool high grade early 70s cards in your collection for less than $50 probably. So here's a 70 Lou Brock. This is probably a $10 card in that ballpark. Lou Brock is pretty cheap. Maybe you don't like Lou Brock. Maybe you're not a Cardinals fan. That's fine. There are players along Lou Brock's level that are in the Hall of Fame that you can get their cards from the early to mid 70s for super cheap, ungraded. Here's Tom Terrific, Tom Seaver, 71 tops. This one's terribly off-centered and really dinged up on the corners, but you could find a way nicer version of this card for probably 20 bucks from Tom Terrific. And I've got a lot of 71 Topps cards here that I'm going to show. So here's a 71 Hank Aaron. You could probably get a nice version of this one for 50, 60 bucks. You could definitely get a better condition one than this one for $20 or $30 probably. Johnny Bench. Everybody loves Johnny Bench. This one's in a little bit better condition, but his cards are super cheap from the early to mid 70s. And probably the best catcher in the history of baseball. But Johnny Bench's cards, ungraded, can be had for super cheap. Even, you know, his 69 Topps is a super cool card. You could probably find a really nice version of that one ungraded in the $50 range. Ted Simmons, this is a Hall of Fame rookie card. I put it in the wrong pile. And some may debate whether Ted Simmons should be in the Hall of Fame or not, but he is. And you could find way nicer versions of this card for probably $20, $30 ungraded. And in graded versions, in 5s and 6s, they'd be less than 100 bucks probably. And here's another one, Bert Blyleven. Ungraded, again, really nice ones you can find for probably 40, 50 bucks. Everybody loves Reggie Jackson, right? So this is his rookie year was 69, so this would be his 3rd year card. This one's going to be a little bit pricier than some, but again, you could buy a really sharp example in the $50, $60 range. And then let's say you buy one that's nice enough to grade a 7. Let's say you pay 60 bucks for it. You get a 7, you pay 15 bucks and send it in to get graded. It comes back as a 7. It's probably a $150 or a $200 card that you're in for about 75 bucks for. So with buying ungraded cards, just be careful. Make sure you check them really well. Make sure they haven't been trimmed. Make sure, you know, sometimes it's hard to pick up if they've had color added, but if you can bring a loop with you to shows and the lighting's good enough to loop the cards, then loop the cards and make sure that you're buying cards that are going to get graded and not sent back as altered or something, right? But it's a risk that you take. But I'll bet you if you pay close attention when you're buying cards, you'll buy way more good cards than you will bad cards. You may get the one occasional card that's been trimmed or color added, but that's probably going to be less than, you know, 1 out of every 100 cards, hopefully, that you buy, you're going to find that with, as long as you're smart about what you're doing. Ted Simmons, or Ted Williams. This is the only Ted Williams card that I currently have in my collection. And I would like to add more, but he wasn't a player here. He was a manager. So if you can't afford Ted Williams playing card days, buy some of his manager cards. They're still cool. It's still Ted Williams, right? And if you find a nice version of this that's going to grade high, it still brings a premium and has a good value to it. But this one you can probably get in really good condition for 10 to 20 bucks. Joe Morgan, this is one of my favorite cards from the 71 Topps set. Super cheap. Joe Morgan is probably one of the best second basemen of all time and a really great player. And all of Joe Morgan's cards are tremendously cheap. And this one you could probably get in really good condition for 5 to 10 bucks all day. So we've got a 72 Johnny Bench. The same rules apply. This is probably a really nice $20, $40 card if you can find a really clean example of it. 72 Reggie. A whole lot. This card's a whole lot cheaper now than it was in the 1993 Beckett. It would have to be a really nice example for me to pay 50 bucks for it. 73 Brooks Robinson. This one's in a little bit better condition, but again, probably a $10 card all day, even in better condition than this. 73 Johnny Bench. Another awesome picture, another awesome card of Johnny Bench. Super, super cheap you can find these for. Probably $20, $30 for really clean examples. And again, here's another leader card. So this is an early career Nolan Ryan and a Steve Carlton. So 2 Hall of Famers. You could pick this up in really, really good condition for $5 to $10. And then now we're going to start moving into a little bit the later 70s. But here's another one, a league leaders or a record breaker, Nolan Ryan, that can be had for super cheap. All of his mid to late 70s cards are pretty cheap. And again, if you buy them graded and they grade in the 7 or 8 range, they can be worth significant value. But you can pick a lot of his stuff up from the mid to late 70s for under $50 for really clean conditioned cards. Jim Palmer, this is probably a $5 card. Now this one's off-centered, but you could find a better version of this for $5 or $10, easy. And then here's another Johnny Bench, 1980 top. So this is the last year of the vintage era, but this is where you can really do some bargain shopping, is this 80 set and the 77, I would say, through 1980. You can find some really amazing Hall of Famer cards for cheap. And another option for you is Hank Aaron's last card is in 1976 tops. So if you want to find a really nice Hank Aaron card, go buy a 76 tops or a 75 tops. Buy those in really good graded example or ungraded examples for $40, $50. And then you can send them in to get graded. If they come back as, 6s, 7s, or 8s, then you're way to the good on a $150 or a $200 card, depending on what kind of grade you get. Here's a Robin Yount second year card. So this one in the 1993 Beckett was $60. It's not that much anymore, I promise you. So you can probably find a near mint one for $20, $40 probably for a second year card of a Hall of Famer. And then here's another one, Mike Schmidt. So his rookie in 73 is one of the most expensive cards in the 70s, but you can buy a 74, which is his first solo card, and an amazing card in my opinion, for way cheaper. You could buy a really nice version of this for $50 probably. And then you've got an amazing second year card of one of the best third basemen in the history of baseball. And it looks way better than his rookie card to me. But that's a great card that you could find cheap. And I guarantee you it's cheaper than $100. So I've got some more rookie cards pulled here. Not a Hall of Famer, but you can buy this card ungraded for cheap. It's hard to find a good centered one, and this one is definitely not, but I paid $30 for this, and you could find a better example of it for probably $50 or $60 of Thurman Munson. And here's Eddie Murray. So I have a PSA 7 Eddie Murray rookie that I paid $70 for. So you can find a better centered, really nice version of this for probably $20 or $30. And it's, in my opinion, one of the best, most iconic rookie cards of the 70s. And then here's another one, Dave Winfield. So again, probably a $40 or $50 card. You can find a really good example of this. If you can find one, because this set, again, with so many in the 70s, has condition issues, centering and stuff like that. But if you can find a really nice centered one for the $50 range that's sharp, I would recommend you buy that. And here's a 76 Dennis Eckersley, another Hall of Fame rookie card. This is probably, you can buy a way better version of this one for probably $20. And then here's a 78 Alan Trammell and Paul Molitor rookie, super cheap. You can buy really nice ones of these all day long for 10 or 20 bucks. And then there are a lot of the rookie cards in the late 70s that you can get super cheap. And 75 is Jim Rice and Gary Carter, and there are a lot of rookie cards in the 75 set that you could pick up ungraded for really cheap. And then of course the big ones out of that set are Robin Yount and George Brett. But you could probably even buy really nice versions of those ungraded for less than $100 maybe, or in the $100 range. And I'm even going to switch gears here. I'm going to go to vintage basketball. And I don't have any vintage football cards, unfortunately. Well, I have a couple, but I didn't dig them out. But you can really find deals on vintage basketball and vintage football cards. And the ones I pulled here today are, in my opinion, some of the coolest sports cards that have ever been made. And these are, let's see, what year is this? These are 76, 77 tops, tall boys. And these are all amazingly clean. That I picked these up a few years ago for way cheap. You can see the sticker on there, $4.50 for Elvin Hayes. And he's a Hall of Famer. But an amazing card. And at some point, I'm going to get these graded, but I love them. And so I'll keep them raw in my collection and be fine with it if I don't get them graded. And here's another one, Wes Unseld. Now again, these aren't the huge name Hall of Famers, right? This isn't Julius Erving and this isn't Kareem, but nonetheless, they're Hall of Famers. And the sticker on this was $3.50. And look at the condition on that card. All of these were amazingly sharp. Phil Jackson is another one. A lesser known guy as far as his playing days goes, but we all know him from his coaching days with the Chicago Bulls. This has a $5.95 price tag on it. And I just think these are some of the coolest sports cards ever made. And again, that's just my opinion, but I think these are great. And then last but not least, and this is probably the biggest name that I have as far as vintage basketball goes, George the Iceman Gervin. Just an amazing player. And this is a super, super sharp card. And I paid, I think, $16 for this. And I would guess that all of these graded would be in the 7 range. And again, I just think they're awesome cards. So again, it doesn't have to be vintage baseball. That's just what my collection is focused on. But you can find some super cool cards that are vintage in any sport. I don't care if it's hockey, football, basketball, what your sport is. You can find those budget Hall of Famers that are super cool cards. So in, hockey, guys like Bobby Clark and, guys like that are not that expensive. And then some of the older football cards like Roger Staubach and Bart Starr, like those are some of the best name vintage football players. But you would be surprised how cheap some of their later career cards are. So, again, I just kind of wanted to build on last week's video and take some of the focus off of the graded side. Even though within my collection, that's what I tend to focus on. Like, I don't want to minimize how cool these cards are because they're not graded. And I think, again, like I said earlier in the video, with the rise in popularity of card grading, I think really cool vintage cards that are really sharp have been kind of relegated to the sidelines. And I'm guilty of it as well. But to me, they're still cool cards. So, again, don't let being on a budget stop you from buying vintage cards if that's what you want to get into, because there are some really cool cards out there that you would be surprised that you can afford. So again, just do your research, be a smart buyer, be disciplined, even though sometimes discipline is what I lack in my collecting. But if you're disciplined with your money, and you have a $50 budget, if you save up for 3 or 4 months, you've got a couple $100 to spend on a card, and you can get some really cool cards for $200. So I think that's about it. So before I wrap this up, if you're still watching, because I'm almost at 30 minutes, I did a collaboration with Greg from Midlife Cards and Theo Clemente Collector last night on Greg's channel and just had a great time. So if you're still watching that, look for that to drop sometime on Sunday. It is Saturday as I'm filming this video, and I probably will publish it on Sunday, and our video on Greg's channel should also be out on Sunday. So keep an eye out for that, and I think that'll do it. So until the next one, everybody have a good one, and I'll talk to you later.